Title: The Guest Who Never Checked Out, True Airbnb Horror Story. Help this channel grow. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. The story begins. The cabin sat at the far end of the lake, the kind of place that made silence feel heavier than sound. It was built from pale wood, with one wide window that reflected the water like a mirror. On paper, it was perfect, cozy, secluded, 5 stars on every review. Angela Peterson had been renting it out for almost 4 years. Nothing bad had ever happened. Couples came and went, city people craving quiet weekends, families chasing lake sunsets. But on November 9, 2021, a guest named Daniel Holt checked in and never checked out. He'd booked through Airbnb, verified account, polite tone. Just me. Need a quiet place to focus on work for a few days. He messaged that at 6:02 p.m. At 6:15, he texted again. Here now. Everything's perfect. That was the last anyone heard from him. 3 days later, the key was still gone from the lockbox. The car was still parked outside, and no checkout message ever came. Angela tried to be reasonable. Maybe he'd extended the stay. Maybe there was a glitch in the system. But the Airbnb calendar was blank, and his phone number went straight to voicemail. By sunrise the next day, she decided to drive out herself. Fog rolled off the lake in long white ribbons. Her tires crunched over the gravel path, and the first thing she noticed was how still everything felt. No birds, no ripples, no sound but the wind brushing the reeds. Daniel's silver Hyundai was parked exactly where he'd left it. Frost covered the windshield. The porch light was still on. Angela knocked, once, twice, then called out, "Daniel? It's Angela, the owner." Silence. The doorknob turned easily. Inside, the air was cold, not just cool, cold, as if no heat had been running for days. The living room was tidy, almost staged. His duffel bag was zipped and sitting by the couch. A half-drunk cup of coffee rested on the table, a ring of mold beginning to form along the surface. The bed was made. The sheets were crisp. There was no sign of struggle, no mess, no note. It looked exactly like a cabin someone had just arrived at, not left. Angela's breath fogged in the air as she walked from room to room. The kitchen smelled faintly of cleaner and something metallic underneath. A faint hum came from the old refrigerator. She tried to shake off the unease. In the bathroom, the mirror was fogged. Not completely, just a faint blur, like someone had showered hours ago and left the fan off. A wet towel lay folded on the edge of the tub. Her voice sounded too loud in the quiet when she whispered, "Daniel?" No answer. When she stepped back into the hall, something made her stop. On the floor, near the doorframe, lay a small metal tag. She bent down. It was stamped with 4 letters, AGS, and a room number, 214. She frowned. The cabin didn't use tags. It wasn't from her property. She called the local sheriff's department. A deputy named Mason Tully arrived about an hour later. His patrol car crunched over the gravel. He looked calm, bored even, until he stepped inside. He moved through the rooms with a flashlight, his boots echoing off the wood. Every reflection of light made the cabin seem smaller. Bag still here. Car outside. Wallet on the counter, he said, almost to himself. Doesn't look like he left in a hurry. Angela pointed out the tag. He turned it over in his glove. "Albany Grand Suites," he murmured. "That's in New York, isn't it?" She nodded. "4 hours away." He slid the tag into a plastic evidence bag. Strange souvenir. Then, as they finished checking the back hallway, Mason noticed something Angela had never paid attention to, a narrow door behind the coat rack. Same paint color as the wall. "Thought you said this place was 1 floor, he said. "It is," she replied. "That door shouldn't lead anywhere." He turned the knob. It resisted, then gave way with a creak that echoed like a groan. Behind it, a short stairway led down into shadow. The smell hit first, cold dirt, damp wood, and a faint trace of something chemical. Mason shone his flashlight downward. The beam caught a stone foundation, a pipe running along the ceiling, and a patchwork of new boards on the floor, like someone had sealed something recently. He took a cautious step down. "Stay here," he said over his shoulder. Angela gripped the banister, frozen halfway. The beam of his light slid across the walls, catching dust, nails, and something else. A faint reflection, like metal, in the far corner. He crouched, brushing dust aside. His voice was steady when he said, "Someone's been down here recently. Boards are still clean." He lifted one plank. Underneath, just dirt and a single item. A second metal key tag, identical to the first, reading AGS room 215. Back upstairs, the air felt wrong, thinner, colder. Mason called it in, requesting records for the Albany Grand Suites. He told Angela to lock up for now. Outside, fog drifted low across the lake. The water barely moved. Angela stared at the frost forming along the edge of the porch railing. Then she noticed it, a footprint pressed into the frost near the steps. Toes splayed. "Deputy," she said quietly, "was that yours?" Mason leaned over. "No, mine's over here." They both stared at the print. Fresh, melting at the edges, pointing toward the tree line. No other prints followed it. That evening, they towed Daniel's car into town. His laptop was on the passenger seat, still open to a blank document titled Chapter 1. Inside the glove compartment, they found a printed map of Vermont with one place circled in red ink, the cabin's address. Angela drove home under gray sky and couldn't stop thinking about that footprint. About how the fog that morning had no sound in it at all, not even birds. She lay awake that night, scrolling through her Airbnb dashboard. At 2:47 a.m., a notification appeared. "Your guest Daniel has submitted a review." Her hands trembled as she tapped it open. "Beautiful place. Very quiet. Exactly what I needed. Will return soon." The timestamp, 2 days after the missing person report was filed. 2 days after filing the missing person report, Angela woke to a knock at her door. Deputy Mason stood on the porch, hat in hand, face pale from lack of sleep. "Morning," he said. "Got something." He set a folder on her kitchen table. Inside were 2 photographs. Both showed the same hotel key tags, AGS 214 and 215, like the ones they'd found in her cabin. "Albany Grand Suites," he said. "We called them. Guess what? Those rooms don't exist anymore. Haven't since 2018. Angela frowned. "What do you mean don't exist?" "The hotel shut that whole floor down after a fire. 4th level, condemned. No guests, no power. The manager swore nobody's been up there for years." "So why are there key cards in my basement?" "That," Mason said, "is what I'm trying to figure out." They drove together that afternoon, 4 hours down the interstate through pale November sky, snow threatening at the edges. The old Albany Grand towered over the river, half its windows boarded, a for lease sign crooked on the brick. Inside, the lobby smelled of dust and lemon polish. An elderly night manager led them toward the service elevator. "4th floor's sealed," he said, jangling a ring of keys. "Insurance never cleared the renovation." The elevator groaned as it rose. When the doors opened, stale air spilled out, thick, cold, carrying a faint sweet rot. The hallway beyond was dim, lined with peeling wallpaper and faded exit signs that still flickered red. Mason's flashlight cut across room numbers painted on the doors. 210, 12, 214. He tried the handle. "But, mind if I?" he asked. The manager hesitated, then passed him a universal key. The door opened with a long sigh. Dust blanketed everything. The desk, the bed, the cracked mirror on the far wall. The carpet smelled of mildew. Angela lingered by the doorway, heart thudding. "No one stayed here in years," she whispered. Mason stepped deeper inside. "Someone has," he said, shining the light across the bed. The sheets were rumpled, fresh footprints marked the dust, and the window was cracked open just enough to let the wind hiss through. On the dresser lay a silver phone charger, the same model Angela had seen plugged in at her cabin. He bagged it, then crouched beside the bed. A spiral notebook sat half buried in dust. He opened it carefully. Inside were scattered notes, half sentences, sketches of floor plans, GPS coordinates, and one repeated line written over and over again. "Room 215 leads back. Angela's skin prickled. "Leads back where?" she asked. Mason didn't answer. He stepped into 215. That room felt worse, colder. The light from his flashlight bent oddly against the far wall, like it was hitting glass. Then Angela saw it. A section of wallpaper bubbled outward. Mason peeled it back and froze. Behind it wasn't drywall but wood paneling, aged and warped, nailed into a frame. "Someone closed this up," he muttered. He pried at the corner with his pocket knife. The panel shifted, revealing a hollow space, about 3 feet deep, filled with bundled electrical cords, a cheap sleeping bag, and an empty thermos. The smell inside was thick with mold and something else, like metal left in rain. "Looks like somebody lived here," he said. Angela's voice was small. "You think it was Daniel?" Mason didn't answer. He was staring at the far end of the hollow. A small, rusted vent ran through the back, leading straight into the darkness of the next room. Room 216. They returned to town just before nightfall. The sky over Vermont burned gray and orange, but neither of them spoke for most of the drive. Angela couldn't stop seeing that notebook, those repeated words. Room 215 leads back. At home, she tried to sleep but couldn't. Every creak in her walls sounded like someone shifting weight just beyond her bedroom. She got up, checked each door twice, and finally settled on the couch with a blanket. At 2:09 a.m., her phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. "Hi Angela. Blew the place. Coming again next week." Same dates. No profile photo. No name. Her breath caught. The wording was identical to Daniel's first message. She stared at the screen until it dimmed, then called Mason. He arrived 15 minutes later, still half-dressed from sleep. He checked the number. Untraceable, masked through a VoIP app. He scrolled down and froze. At the bottom of the thread, below Daniel's original messages, the new one was attached to the same chat log, meaning it came from Daniel's account. But the Airbnb profile had been suspended days ago by the police. "How is that possible?" she whispered. Mason didn't answer. His expression had hardened, the kind of look people wear when they don't want to say what they're thinking. The next morning, the two of them returned to the cabin. The fog had lifted, sunlight cut across the frozen lake. But something felt different, the silence heavier, almost expectant. Mason unlocked the door. The air inside was colder than outside. Dust hung thick in the beams of light. "Stay here," he said, stepping into the hall. Angela followed anyway. The house was exactly as they'd left it, except for one thing. The basement door. It stood open. Neither of them had left it that way. A faint draft rose from below, carrying the smell of damp wood and something faintly sweet. Mason drew his flashlight again and descended. "Boards are moved," he called up. Angela leaned over the railing. "What do you mean moved?" "They're not in the same place." His voice echoed oddly, like the room below had widened. Then a moment later, "Angela, you need to see this." She forced herself down the stairs, one step at a time. Her breath clouded the air. Mason's flashlight beam trembled against the floorboards. Several planks had been pried up and leaned against the wall. Beneath them, the dirt was disturbed, flattened in long, smooth patterns, like something had been dragged. At the center sat a mirror, small and square, face down in the soil. Mason lifted it carefully. Its surface was cloudy, but faint fingerprints trailed across the glass. He turned it over. On the back, scratched crudely into the metal, were 4 letters, "This." Angela's stomach turned. The beam of light caught something else, metal embedded just behind the mirror's spot in the dirt. Mason brushed it away and pulled up a rusted vent grate, the same type they'd seen behind room 215's wall. The two stared at each other. The basement air pulsed with cold. It felt alive, like the walls were breathing. Angela whispered, "What if it's the same vent?" Mason's jaw tightened. "That hotel's 4 hours away." "I know." He didn't move for a long moment, just listened. Then came a sound, faint, rhythmic, hollow. Like a slow exhale through metal. It came from the vent. They left the cabin before sunset. Mason sealed it as a potential crime scene. That night, Angela packed a small bag and drove to her sister's. She tried to convince herself it was over, that they'd find a rational explanation. But as she unpacked, her phone buzzed again. A new Airbnb booking notification. Guest, Daniel Holt. Check-in, tomorrow. Property, the cabin by the lake. Her account had been deactivated weeks earlier. By morning, the notification was gone. No trace of the booking. Angela stared at the screen until her eyes blurred, refreshing the page again and again. Nothing. She called Deputy Mason first thing. He didn't answer. The call went straight to voicemail. She left a message. Someone just booked the cabin under Daniel's name again. I swear I didn't reopen the listing. Please call me back. Then she packed her things and drove. She didn't tell anyone where. She just needed to see for herself. The lake was frozen when she arrived, a thin shell of ice stretching to the far tree line. Frost webbed across the windows of the cabin. From a distance, it looked peaceful, dead quiet. But the porch light was on again. She hadn't been there in a week. Power had been cut by the sheriff's order. The meter shouldn't even be active. Angela parked halfway up the drive and walked the rest. Her breath came out white and shaky. The closer she got, the more wrong it felt. The same stillness as before, but thicker, heavier. She stepped onto the porch and froze. Someone had cleared the frost from the doorknob. Inside, the air was sharp with cold. The curtains swayed slightly, though the windows were closed. Everything looked exactly the same. The couch, the mug, the folded towel. Her shoes crunched softly over the dust. The basement door stood open again. This time, the air rising from below was warmer, like something breathing upward. She could almost hear it, the low, steady hiss of moving air through metal. Angela forced herself down the steps, whispering Mason's name though she knew he wasn't there. The flashlight beam cut through dust, catching the mirror lying where they'd found it before. But the vent was different now. It was clean, no rust, no dirt, like someone had polished it. And the faint sound wasn't wind. It was a voice. A man's voice, distant and strained, repeating something over and over. She leaned closer. Her pulse roared in her ears. Room 215 leads back, room 215 leads back. She staggered backward, heartbeat slamming. The sound was faint but real, echoing through the vent from somewhere deep beyond the wall. When she fled upstairs, daylight had vanished. The sky outside had gone a flat blue-gray. Her car sat in the driveway, doors closed, windows fogged from the inside. She grabbed her phone to call for help. No signal. Every instinct screamed to leave, but something kept her still, a horrible curiosity that whispered see it through. She went to the front window. Across the lake, faint orange lights flickered in the trees. Maybe reflections, maybe something else. Then a sound came from the back hallway. Footsteps. Slow, dragging. "Hello," she called out. No answer. Just another step. The temperature dropped. Her breath came in thin clouds. She turned the corner toward the hall. The basement door was closing on its own, the latch catching with a quiet click. Angela stumbled outside into the cold air, slipping on the frost as she ran to her car. She yanked the handle, but she didn't remember locking it. Her hands shook as she pressed the fob. Nothing. Dead battery. She turned toward the porch and froze. The cabin lights were on now. All of them. Through the front window, she saw movement, a shadow crossing the living room, tall, slow, gliding just out of the light's reach. She whispered Mason's name again, though deep down she knew it wasn't him. Her phone buzzed suddenly. The screen lit up. A known number. "You forgot to leave the key." The message repeated 3 times in a row, identical wording, identical punctuation. Angela dropped the phone. It landed screen up on the ice. A new message appeared. "Coming back tonight." The porch light flickered once, then went out. She ran. Down the driveway, across the frozen dirt, until the cabin was just a dark square behind her. The trees loomed tall and silent. The road stretched ahead, but the fog was rolling in again, thick, silver, swallowing everything past a few yards. She didn't look back until she heard the crunch of footsteps behind her. One set. Slow. When she turned, the porch light was back on. A figure stood in the doorway, still, almost featureless in the fog. She couldn't see his face, but she knew the height, the posture. "Daniel." He didn't move. He just stood there watching. Angela stumbled backward until she reached the bend in the road. The figure never followed. He only stepped aside and disappeared into the house, as if nothing had happened. When deputies returned the next day, the cabin was empty. No footprints. No signs of struggle. Only Angela's car, doors unlocked, keys in the ignition. Her phone lay frozen beside it. Mason reviewed the texts himself. The sender was traced to a signal bouncing from Albany, New York, the same block as the old Grand Suites. They sent a unit to check. Room 215 was open when they arrived. Inside, a camping mat, a space heater, and a phone still logged into Daniel Holt's Airbnb account. It was charging on the wall. The screen showed the same message thread with Angela. The last text sent read, "Arrived. Beautiful place. Quiet. See you soon." Time-stamped 5 minutes after Angela disappeared. The case file closed as unresolved. Officially, there was no connection between the cabin and the condemned hotel. The property was sold to a private buyer a year later, but the new owner, someone named L. Carter, never listed it publicly again. Still, locals say that sometimes when fog rolls across the lake at night, the porch light turns on by itself. And if you stand close enough to the window, you can hear something faint through the vent in the floor. A man's voice repeating softly, "Room 215 leads back." If you thought this story was terrifying, wait until you hear what happened in the next one. Subscribe before it drops.